And welcome everybody to another edition of the GSMC Football Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. As always, I'm your host, Kenneth Grunfelder, and it's great to have you guys here on this Thursday, February 13th. We have a lot to cover on the show today. Before I get into that, just want to remind you guys, as always, to tip or donate and get your comments recognized. Make sure to hit that super chat button in the chat if you want to see me acknowledge any thought or comment you may have throughout the live broadcast. Makes the show more lively, more entertaining between myself, the host, and you guys, the viewers. We appreciate you guys' viewership each and every day. So any contribution you can make to the show means the world to us as we put out content for you guys each and every day. And also the other way to help out the show is by going to the link at the bottom of the show segment on the ticker, GSMCPodcast.net. That is GSMCPodcast.net. So let's get into what we are going to discuss for today. So I apologize yesterday. There were so many connection issues during my show, so I really didn't get to put out the content that I wanted to yesterday. So basically everything that I wanted to talk about yesterday will be discussed today. So we will talk about Jalen Hurts and where would we rank him after he captures his first Super Bowl championship amongst the top quarterbacks in the NFL. We'll get into that conversation. We'll talk about if the Eagles' performance in the Super Bowl, their defense's performance in the Super Bowl, where does that rank amongst the best performances in the Super Bowl ever by a defense? We'll talk about what teams were the most disappointing in 2024 in the NFL. We'll also talk about the Giants and how this was arguably their worst season in franchise history, not just on the field, but off the field as well. And then in the final part of the show, I will do my final power rankings for this season, my top 5. So let's get into the first topic, which is talking about Jalen Hurts. And where would we rank him after this Super Bowl performance? And I got to tell you, it is really hard because it's how you rank your quarterbacks. Everybody's going to be different with how they rank their quarterbacks. Because you could talk about the talent, the accolades, you could combine them. I was having a conversation with my friend yesterday, and he brought up what quarterbacks would you draft? If you're a GM, what quarterbacks would you draft? If there was a complete reset in the NFL and everybody was available, what quarterbacks would you take in order? There's so many different ways to rank quarterbacks. For me, I guess it's like a combination of everything, a little bit of everything. Because I do think with this Super Bowl championship here that Jalen Hurts just won, you definitely have to put him in the top 5. Definitely a top 5 quarterback. However, for me, I would only put him at 5 because I still think that Joe Burrow is a better quarterback. I still think Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes is obviously going to stay at 1. Even after that disastrous performance on Sunday, he's still going to be at number 1. But that's kind of where I'm at. However, you could put Jalen Hurts ahead of a Joe Burrow because Joe Burrow doesn't have any accolades, doesn't have any MVPs, doesn't have any All-Pros, doesn't have any Super Bowls. Jalen Hurts has played well in the 2 Super Bowl games that he's appeared in against the Chiefs. He's outplayed Patrick Mahomes on the biggest stage. And now, after Sunday, he's got a Super Bowl ring to his resume. So I would put him over, well, I would be okay with people putting him over Joe Burrow. I could see why people would put him over Joe Burrow. I could also see why people would put him over Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson because now he has that Super Bowl. But for me, I can't put him over Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson. I can't. Because those guys have MVPs, they have All-Pros. Josh Allen was second-team All-Pro this year. Lamar was first-team All-Pro. I can't do it. However, Jalen Hurts, like I said, he has played well in the biggest games. And he wins games. You know, you take a look back a couple of years ago to when he got hurt towards the end of the regular season. The year they went to the Super Bowl and lost to the Chiefs. Gardner Minshew played a couple games, and they lost those games. The Cowboys game was competitive. That was back and forth. But, I mean, well, both games were competitive. But, again, they lost the Cowboys game. They lose to the Saints at home. The Saints didn't make the playoffs that year. The Saints were not good. If Jalen Hurts plays in that game, they win. They win that game. So we could sit here and say, oh, Jalen Hurts has a stacked team, which he does, but they need Jalen Hurts. Jalen Hurts is an important part of this team. If Kenny Pickett's playing in the Super Bowl on Sunday, I think things go differently. I mean, the defense was out of this world, but I don't think with Kenny Pickett playing that we would have saw the game that we saw on Sunday. Jalen Hurts played really well in the Super Bowl. And I talked about this. That early interception didn't faze him. He was locked in that entire game. And he did it not just with his legs, but with his arm. He was the leading rusher once again for the Eagles in the Super Bowl. And, some of the throws to A.J. Brown, the back shoulder, even the one that got called back, the offensive PI early on. You could tell that Jalen Hurts was locked in. And then, of course, there was the dagger to Devontae Smith, which, the game was over before that. That made it 34-0. I thought it was over when it was, pretty much thought it was over when it was 17-0. But he was locked in. And a lot of people, they evaluate quarterbacks on their stats. I get it. Jalen Hurts might not win football games in the prettiest ways, but he wins games. He also doesn't turn the football over. Also, having that conversation with my friend last night, same friend, talked about the other things, the other qualities, the leadership. Because he's one of those quiet leaders. And before the Super Bowl, you had Peter Schrager talking about Jalen Hurts making this great speech before the game. This was one of their best team meetings of the season. And look at what happened. Look at what happened. It showed on the field. This team was motivated. He was motivated to get this thing right this time, knock off the Chiefs, and be Super Bowl champions. So, like I said, Jalen Hurts is a top 5 QB. But to me, I'm still putting him at 5. And I know some people are going to complain at that. I get it. I'm still going to put him there. Now, if the Eagles go and repeat next year, it's going to be hard not to put him up even more. But even then, he's the first QB in this new era that we have here that's won a Super Bowl. In the Mahomes era, he is the first QB in this era to win besides Mahomes. Because I'm not counting Brady and I'm not counting Stafford because they're in the last era. He's the first one to break through. And once again, you could say, well, look at the team that he has. I get it, but he played well in the Super Bowl. He contributed. You could say he did go along for the ride, but Peyton Manning went along for the ride in Super Bowl 50. Jalen Hurts played a solid game. He turned those Patrick Mahomes interceptions into 2 touchdowns. Well, actually, no, shouldn't say that. Cooper DeJean was a pick 6. The other interception was turned into a touchdown. So, that's kind of where I'm at with the Jalen Hurts debate. And, we'll have more conversations about the Eagles tomorrow because I do want to get into talking about could they become the next dynasty, because I know that's a conversation that's being had this week. And I know it's premature, I guess, but, you look at this Eagles team. They're going to have most of these players next year. Who's to say they can't do it again? But we'll have that conversation tomorrow. But Jalen Hurts is a guy that has dealt with a lot of criticism. A lot of people have doubted him. I've critiqued him at times. I don't think I was as harsh as some of these people on social media and some of these personalities you see on TV. But I took the stance of, listen, there's going to be a time where this passing game is really going to have to step up. And Jalen Hurts played really well in the playoffs. Played his best games in the championship game and in the Super Bowl. In the championship game, the running game was great, the defense was great, the passing game was great. Saquon Barkley really didn't do anything in the Super Bowl. And Jalen Hurts in the passing game stepped up. But a lot of people are, of course, going to point to how the defense just had a performance for the ages, which I agree with. But they didn't go along for the ride. They contributed. But let me know what you guys think, though. Where would you rank Jalen Hurts? Would you put him ahead of everyone that isn't Mahomes? I know there's some people that would put him ahead of Mahomes just because he's outplayed him in 2 Super Bowls. And, recency bias. Mahomes is coming off of his worst performance ever in a game. But it's really tough to rank quarterbacks. It is, because you could go about it so many different ways. But for me, I think you got to put Jalen Hurts at least in the top 5. But there's still, I'm still going to put Burrow ahead of him. I'm still going to put Lamar and Josh Allen, and especially Mahomes too. But he's a Super Bowl champion, and 3 of the 4 guys that I just mentioned have not done that yet. One of them has played in the Super Bowl, but he didn't win it. So, but let me know what you guys think about where you would rank Hurts. Let me know in the comments. So we are going to take our first break of the show now. And then when we come back, we are going to talk about the Eagles defense and their performance in the Super Bowl. Where does that rank amongst some of the best performances in the Super Bowl, defensive-wise? So we're going to get into that conversation when we come back from our first break. So with that being said, stick around, and we'll be right back here on the GSMC Football Podcast.